What do you think? Preferences, display.
The what?
Oh, it only looks like there's one display. Let me try it just for a second, just to see if it's.
You can't put every single DHCP option in one RA though.
Okay, so that works. So it's working.
Anything that lets you put a URL that forces users to go to that URL. It has to have URLs.
There you go.
Okay.
I guess I just woke it up or something. Are we going to use the clicker thing?
Yeah. Where's the?
Session feels like the dark last day of school before the holidays.
Yeah.
Bring your toys in.
All right. Well, this is the DHC working group meeting. If you are expected to be somewhere else, you're in the wrong room. And I'm Bernie Volz, one of the co-chairs.
And I'm Tomek Brugalski. And welcome to the working group. I welcome all 8 of you here. No, there's probably like 12 people in the room. Okay, let's get started. So please note well, if you see this for the first time, you are doing it wrong. Okay, so blue sheets, Bernie already
Yep, they're
passed them.
circulating, or they.
Please make sure you sign them. Well, with this amount of attendance, I suppose the next time we are meeting in a closet anyway, so you can as well skip them. Okay, guys, we need Jabber scribes in case like the.
Ted's already volunteered.
Okay, great. And it would be appreciated if you could help with the note taking on the Etherpad. So we already introduced ourselves. We used to have a working group secretary, but Shank stepped down. So if you are interested in helping a bit with the working group, the position is open. Okay, so this is the agenda for today. Ian asked to go to the second slide because he has a plane to catch. So we will go through the Lightway 4/6 dynamic provisioning, then we'll do the DHCP6 update. I will provide an update regarding the force renew extensions. And finally, Bernie will talk about an old draft that possibly could be resurrected. Okay, so working group status, we had one RFC published, TopoConf. We also have 2 documents sent to IASG, the DHCP6 failover and DHCP6 previous land hint issue. With the 3315Bs, we are making progress. There's a separate presentation, so I won't go into the details. The young draft, it's progressing forward, but making it slowly. With the secure DHCP6, the work continues. There were several versions published. We had some discussion on DHC mailing list and also on SAG. So with the first new extensions, there was no progress. Authors are not responsive. Bernie and I tried to contact them several times. So we'll have on agenda a slot, to discuss what to do about it. There are 2 drafts that were adopted, DHC Relay Port and DHC Relay Server Security. There's technically, there's the last call. On the second one is in progress because I haven't summarized it up. There were very few responses. Actually, only Bernie responded, I think. So if you have some comments, please do send them to the list. Okay, so we have several individual drafts. One of them is the software DHCP 4/6, and there is a presentation about it coming right after this one. Okay, and the last update regarding the working group is about milestones. So we recently completed 2 milestones. We still have 2 milestones open. The first one is that we should recharter. This would probably make sense after we finish our work on 3315Bs. And of course, we have the second milestone. So I have a question to the working group. So do you guys consider the milestones useful at all? Have you looked at them and followed them, updated them? Okay, that's a good feedback. Okay, so Suresh, are we required to continue updating those milestones?
I think it's useful to update the milestones because it helps me plan, like, when the documents come through, so I don't get like I have like suddenly 14 documents in my queue in the last 2 weeks, and it's very difficult for me to plan to get them on telechats and everything. So I want to have an approximate idea when something is going to be done. So I think it's good.
Okay. Okay. So in that case, only one person is using it, but he's an important one. So yeah. Okay. In that case, we'll continue updating them. Okay. So that's it. Ian.
Good morning, Ian Farrer from Deutsche Telekom. Can I have the first slide, please? Or second slide, technically. So I think I presented this at a few meetings back in DHC. It's probably going on a couple of years now, but a quick refresher about the.
I'm just trying to get rid of that.
Okay.
There it goes.
The what and the whys. So can you go to the first slide just so I can introduce what this is? So for softwires, we need to have v4 configuration and we need to build a tunnel in v6. So we've got a few parameters that need to be provisioned to the client. Last year we published a static provisioning DHCP address, which deals with essentially you have pre-configured and kind of deterministic ways of assigning these addresses to clients. And that's out, that's implemented and working. But obviously, with any kind of static and pre-configured configuration model, there's inherent wastage in there, and it's not possible to get address sharing and aggressive use of the remaining v4 resources that you've got. Another particular thing that needs to be solved with softwires is that you need, as an operator, to know what the client's tunnel endpoint v6 address is going to be. So I mean there's a way of kind of pre-calculating that we've used in the static provisioning model, but this provides a way that the client can just simply tell the server in a parameter, this is what I'm going to use, and then the server stores that alongside the lease information, so that you've got a kind of single point in the network that you can say, this is all the information I need for v4, for v6, and I can use that to provision the other elements in the architecture. Next slide, please. So yeah, this has been around in software for some time, but hasn't really moved very far in there, because essentially everything that's described in here is DHCP 4 over DHCP 6 related. So there's 2 RFCs that have already been published, both worked on in DHC, so that's 7341 and 7618. 7618 deals with address sharing in v4. Leased addresses, and so as this is kind of the final part that makes the whole thing come together, it made more sense, or hopefully it makes more sense, to put it in DHC. Next slide, please. Right, so here's a kind of rough overview. I mean, it doesn't show the full DHCP message flow here, but if you're familiar with DHCP 4/6, it all starts off by receiving an option from the DHCP 6 server that will either either enable it or contain a unicast address for the DHCP 4/6 server. You then have a new message flow, which is the DHCP 4/6 one, and in there you're carrying DHCP4 messages inside a particular DHCP6 message type. So within the flow, we pass from the server to the client a hint. This is in the form of an IP version 6 prefix, and this is to essentially help the client to find the right address or the right prefix out of all the one that's got available, so that it can have a chance of getting a software built on the right place that's going to be routable and whatever else. The client then builds an address on that prefix and indicates back to the server, this is my /128 that I'm going to use my tunnel endpoint as my tunnel endpoint address. So at that point, once all of this is completed, the DHCP server has got all of the information that's relevant for the software client, and then this can then be pushed into the other network element, the AFTR, we're using netconf for this, but we talked about using things like bulk lease query and things like that for it. And at that point, you've got a fully functioning software and a dynamically configured address that can be, works under normal DHCP4 kind of leasing. Okay, next slide, please. So there's two new options in here. The first one being the hint option, which is just simply a v6 prefix. And the second one is the 128-bit address that will be used as the tunnel endpoint that the client passes back to the server. Next slide, please. This is the kind of, the minutiae of what exactly happens at each step. And you can see that it's aligned with the DHCP4 message flow. So the additional new options that I'm talking about here are carried with the corresponding v4 message as it goes through the normal DHCP4 leasing process. Next slide. So we're working on an implementation at the moment. It's not completed, but there's already some feedback that's coming back from there about the text that's in. So I submitted the 06 update, I think 2 days ago, that took into account some of those things. There's also some other comments that have come back from our implementer, and those will be up on the list shortly. There was another review that came in from Jinmei overnight. So there's some other comments that need to be addressed there. I think there's still quite a few things to be considered in here at the moment, so I don't think it's near to being done. But hopefully with being in DHC, it will get the attention from the right people that it needs. Next slide. Okay, so the question I really wanted to ask is, do we think this is suitable to move to DHC? And if so, is it something that would be adoptable?
So does anybody have any opinions one way or the other, or, supporting moving it or opposing moving it?
Tim Jones. So I haven't read the draft, but from what Ian's presented, it seems sensible enough to me.
So Krishnan, I read the draft. I think it's okay to move here. Like, have you talked to Terry about it, or
To
Terry?
yes, before I suggested this, that's where it started.
Okay, sounds good. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm perfectly fine if the group wants to take it up.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Ted, you had something to add?
Oh, I'm just in favor of taking it up.
Okay.
Ted Lemon.
Yeah, so with my co-chair hat off, I'm also supporting moving it here. So it makes sense. It's a reasonable draft, and it's a good fit for DHC. So
Yeah, we also have from the Jabber room, Lin Hui Sun and Tianshang Li both support adopting this.
So I guess one question though is, do you want, do we want to start a working group of call adoption now? Do you want to update the draft and then start the call? Given that you mentioned that there were some pending updates.
I mean, it's just when I put the 06 update that we've had some discussion starting on the list. So let's see how that pans out. I'll make an update based on that, and then we'll do the CFA on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I would have recommended.
Okay, good.
Great.
Okay, thanks very much.
All right. Thank you. So I guess I got to stand in the pink box. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little update on what's happening with the DHCP v6 biz work, and we have a few open issues that we'd like some feedback on. So just as a reminder as to sort of where we are today, the 05 version was published in June. We initiated a working group last call in July, which lasted a while, and it ended in August, and we got approximately 290, comments. It wasn't 290 separate emails, but we kind of took everybody's comments and chopped them up into individual items that we're tracking on a Google Sheet. And, obviously there were duplicates in there, but most of them are probably unique. There were 16 serious reviewers, that generated on the order of 10 to, 30 comments each. So there was very, I really thank everybody that reviewed it. You guys did a fantastic job. This is the way working group last calls should work, and it got excellent coverage. So, that was good. Obviously, the bad news is that we have 290 issues to go through, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of them, but the problem is that it's just a lot of stuff to go through. We've addressed about 200 of the comments, but there's more to go. There, in that last set, there's probably some duplicates as well. Next slide. Many of the comments were minor, clean up text, fix typos, formatting issues, or inconsistencies where the document in one part said one thing and kind of contradicted itself in another section. Usually just stuff that we had done when we edited it. We didn't, edit all the text in certain sections. There were a bunch of comments about clarifying sections, adding more definitions, and even reorganizing the text to improve its presentation and logical flow. And we have a few potential changes that we want your input on. So the first of those is the Solmax RT and also InfMax RT. The RC 7083, which we never really caught during this, is that I never really clarified how the options should be updated if there are multiple advertise or replies received. Okay. If the client accepts an advertise, should it use just the options from that and ignore the others? But what if it didn't contain options, but others did? And what happens if no advertise is accepted and multiple advertises are received? So it's a question of, we can either just say, well, nobody cared at 7083, so we'll leave it alone and just copy the text in here, or we can try to address this. One proposal is to use the smallest legal value across the received options. There's some boundary checks that are specified in 7083. I should point out that probably this is a minor issue because on a properly operating network, you would expect the last bullet to apply and that all the servers, if there are multiple servers, are going to use the same values. But, that may not always be the case.
Tab Lemon, I have a comment on that particular bullet. I think that as a way of avoiding attacks, which probably wouldn't happen on a really secure network, but it certainly could happen on a less secure network like a home net. It is almost certainly a good idea to take the smallest length that you hear, because otherwise somebody can just sit there and send you the super long Solmax RT and bam, you're off the wire for however long.
Right, and that's what we kind of figured is that somebody can still do the opposite and give you a small value, but that's less harmful.
Suresh Krishnan. So I'm a bit conflicted here, right? Because I hear what Ted says, but the idea of doing 7083 was to increase this thing to reduce the traffic volumes, right?
Correct, and it did two things. 7083, it changed the default up, and it provided this option to override the default. And you can only increase the default, if I remember correctly, from that base of 3,600 seconds.
No, you can go down to 60.
Okay, you can go
Like
down
the-
to 60.
Right.
Okay.
And so I have an alternate proposal. Like, I haven't thought this out. Like, I just came up with it. Like, if you get like multiple different ones, you change to the default, which is 3,600. Because like, then like somebody could like have an attack where they put in like a small number and advertise it and just like increase the traffic on the link for no reason, right? So
yeah.
I just don't know. Like, I haven't thought it through, as I said, right? So,
But I mean, that sounds like a plausible solution. You know, the one thing that we have to remember is that a client isn't necessarily going to wait for, you know, lots of them to come by either. So, but I think if it does receive conflicting values, maybe the best thing to do, as you say, is just say use the default and leave it alone.
right. And it really depends on the implementation too, if it's actually keeping track of how it got the Solmax RT, right? So maybe it can check if it's already non-default, but maybe it's not non-trivial, but it's.
Yeah, and that I didn't bring it up on this slide, but there, you know, there's another little complexity, and that is what, you know, when do you ever set Solmax RT back to the default? Suppose you get a large value or different value, okay? When are you supposed to set it back? Because it never really, the 7083 never really talked about that issue. You know, since you kind of stepped a little bit into it, I figure maybe it's worth also trying to address that, is to kind of say that maybe, you know, one way is that obviously if the client solicits again and gets a different value, then it knows, okay, I'm going to use that, right? But that's a subtle issue that, you know, does exist.
Right. And also another thing is like, maybe Tomek can answer this, like, do you keep track of where you got the Solmax RT from which server, right? Because if the server itself changes the Solmax RT, like you need to know if it's an inconsistency or the server just changed the Solmax RT, right?
Yeah, I don't, again, it doesn't really talk about that.
Yeah, so
Level of
it's
detail.
implementation specific. If you really want to, you can keep track of it. But
I just wanted to know about Kia, like what it does, right? So.
okay,
Right.
so Kia is a server only. So
Yeah, this is really, we'd have to ask client implementers, and I don't know how many, you know, Tim might know whether there's a lot that have implemented 7083 or not.
So Tim Winters, UNHIOL. So we've only really seen it in home gateways. Most of them, when you reboot them, will lose it
Yeah,
And
well, that
read-
makes sense.
and relearn it. I do have two that keep it forever, and that's been
Oh,
interesting. So we might want to say something about this because I suspect more people will just take whatever new value they get and apply it forever, and it's nasty. It is nasty if you set it to a high value. It's going to sit for a while. But I mean, I will say this is a unique test case or a unique case in that it means there's nothing answering it. So I don't know how much we care to put in crazy text here to try to
right.
fix
Well,
this.
that's the other question, is that it's kind of a failure case anyway, or an odd case anyway.
Ted Lemon. So a couple things. One, I think Suresh's suggestion is great. If we get conflicting values, use the default.
Yes.
I think that it's actually not likely to be a problem in the typical use case for this, in the sense that, you know, if your cable modem goes and sends out a solicit, it's on a cable network that
Correct.
is relatively tightly constrained and controlled. And so the likelihood of you getting an attack from some third party on that network is pretty slim. It's not a bad idea to have this you know, this fallback, but I don't think it's a really serious issue. It's more of a serious issue on a home net, but on a home net, you know, I think Suresh's solution works fine. And what was I going to say? Sorry, your second point was about, oh, right. I think that the time to discard the value is whenever you see a link state transition.
Right.
And implicitly also that means on a reboot, because otherwise, you know, certainly for cable modems, you're not likely to ever see a link state transition. It's not a big deal. But if you do, like, you know, if one of the things that cable providers will do is they'll whack your link to get you to restart, to reinitialize. So
Yeah, and that does raise a funny question about, you know, should these options then be allowed in the confirm, you know, rebind case, right? Because that's what you're going to do when the link flips. So maybe it doesn't matter because you're not soliciting at that case, and so we don't really care. And that may just be the answer, right? Is you could restore, and if you do ever fall back to solicit phase, you'll get new values. So maybe that's the way to solve that. Is it's not necessary because of that. All right, so we'll probably somebody from the biz team will summarize and provide the suggestions for confirmation on the mailing list, and we can discuss a little bit further there. All right, next issue. So another request that we received was to remove the following paragraph from section 17.1.10.1, and we believe this is to allow to run multiple independent state machines on a single interface. Oh, this isn't the updated slides, but anyway, is to discourage but allow is what I think we wanted to say, to run multiple independent state machines on a single interface. And we kind of feel that this, if you're going to do something as complicated as that, you should take that text with a grain of salt. The all required leases, and that means just those for which that state machine is kind of running. Because we kind of say at the beginning of this document somewhere, I think we kind of talk about that, this is sort of a single instance of a DHCP client, and you would run a different one on each interface and things like that. So I'm not sure we want to remove this paragraph or even reword it.
So, Ted Lemon, my only reason for not loving this text is that it does have the effect that if you are running two DHCP servers on a link, one of which is doing one of which is doing PD and one of which is doing NA, then this is going to make you do a lot more work. But
we don't really support.
Arguably, not a great thing to be doing anyway. So
right,
that's not a problem.
And it's not really the 75-50 stateful issues kind of group them anyway. Yeah. Okay. And I think if you want to build a client that does that, I don't think you're prohibited from doing that.
Right. And you might want to use a different IAID anyway, because presumably you have some reason why you're doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, we'll take this to the list with a summary of what we kind of concluded here and confirm. Next. So the last one that I have here is about IPsec encryption. And we got a comment that, we kind of now say that the null encryption can be used because DHCP messages, the data in there is not generally considered confidential. And that's very debatable today because there's a lot of issues with the ISG about this, and that's why I wrote the relay server security draft, which didn't mandate but kind of highly recommended IPsec usage. So, I'd like to just drop the text in from that document, but that document is in working group last call. Well, it kind of technically expired, but it hasn't yet really been processed, and I think I was the only one to comment on it, and as a co-author that probably doesn't count much. So we encourage people to look at that document and indicate whether you support this, because then we can just drop a lot of this text from that document into the 3315 biz. So I will send something to the list on this as well, but again, I think the solution is support the working group last call on the relay server security draft, and then if everybody supports that, we can probably just copy that text. And that will also, I think, make the ISG happier that we have a bit stronger statement about security and things. Okay, that's all I had for that. The next steps for the document are that, what? What's that? Yeah, thanks for all the comments, but, if you have some that are still out there, it's not too late, we'll take them. We did publish the 06, which has some of the updates, and it's possible that we made some mistakes and stuff. So we'll continue to work on it. We'll hopefully publish an 07. Our hope is to do that before the next IETF so that we can do a short review of the document with all the changes and hopefully send it off with maybe an 08 published to Suresh shortly after the next IETF. So that's how we'll update those milestones. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so this will be a very brief presentation. So we had the first. Next slide, please. So we had the first renew extensions. This was a draft that was presented in Buenos Aires. It was adopted in May 2016. The response during the presentation and adoption, it was not very popular, but in general, people who expressed their opinions, they were in favor. So after that, there were completely no updates, no discussions. We tried to reach the authors, also primary author, Lu Yuan. She used to work for Microsoft, but she's now in a different team. So outside of Microsoft, and the draft has expired. So next. So the question is, are we still interested in this work? I think we tried to reach the other authors 3 times and nobody responded. So is there anyone interested in this work to continue? Okay, so I don't see anyone. Okay, in that case, we're going with option B, just drop the work. So we'll mark it as that, and
But we'll confirm on the mailing list to make sure that nobody else has any
okay,
interest, right?
yeah.
Before taking that action.
My personal feeling is I don't object to anybody continuing this work if somebody wants to do it, but I have no interest in continuing it myself.
Okay, and it's V4, so it's, yeah, okay. So that's it. Thanks.
Okay, so I'd like to talk about possibly resurrecting an old draft that we started to work on. Next slide. Back in 2005 of October was when the original draft was written. It was adopted by the working group back in January 2006, kind of lingered there for several years, and then January 09, the 04 was published, which is the current version. It obviously has long since expired. And interest was primarily lost because there were, if I remember correctly, there was a concern about out-of-order packets might cause issues. And the other issue was that Cable Labs had specified in relay agents were starting to implement just doing relay snooping, just as they had done with DHCP v4, because it worked great for v4, so why not use it for v6? So the working group was a bit too late in sort of doing this work. Next slide. So why now? Well, the original motivation was we wanted to avoid relay snooping. They shouldn't need to look, relay shouldn't need to look inside the individual client messages to determine what leases a client was assigned or what other actions, like, when a client released a lease, that the lease was removed. And today, the original argument was that if we had strong security at some point, security might make this impossible. We also wanted to reduce complexity for relays because some relay messages, some reply messages do not have details on what the client did. For example, a release doesn't, the release message going to the server has a list of addresses and prefixes that might be released, but the reply coming back has nothing. It just basically says, yeah, I released your address is a success or failure. Usually it's just success, but so there's no information for the relay. So it makes the relay's job a bit harder because it has to monitor the client's requests, not just the replies. And the idea is that with this is that the server provides the relay explicit details in the relay reply message about what it's done, what leases it's assigned or extended lifetimes on, or even those that it released. Next slide. So the design is that, the relay added an ORO with this new option to the relay forward. And this kind of was a little bit unique in that the ORO, tended to be more of used just by the client, whereas here it was making use of it by the relay. Now we could have a relay echo option if we want, a relay request option if we wanted to, an RRO instead of an ORO, but it probably isn't, I don't see the value in doing that because it's clear where this message, this option would be in the relay forward part of the message, not in the client's message. And the server added this option to the relay reply with all the addresses and prefixes in use by the client. Pretty much the relay agent was only supposed to use the valid lifetimes, and a valid lifetime of 0 meant that the address or prefix was released. And again, the advantage here is relays no longer need to look into the client's message and is explicitly notified of server actions. Next slide. So the problem today is that we're working on secure DHCP v6, which is going to encrypt the messages. So the client to server communication is encrypted, so relay snooping no longer works. So what do we do? Well, I think in the short term, assuming that we can get the secure DHCP v6 work done, will be that for certain environments where relay snooping is required, such as in cable DOCSIS, they won't be able to support secure DHCP v6 option. Maybe not a big deal, but it is there. Another option, which is the one I'm proposing, is we resurrect this draft. And I think some of the issues that were raised about it are probably pretty minor because relay snooping can suffer from the same out-of-order packet delivery issues and things like that, and has been done very successfully without, to my knowledge, any significant problems or any problems at all. So I think that was probably an overrated issue. It was a nice conceptual issue, but it wasn't probably a realistic issue. Another option is if you do secure DHCP v6, maybe you have to provide the relay to server certificates, but Suresh shakes his head, and I agree that I don't think that's a very good idea either. There are other options like having the relay use active lease query to keep up with updates, which that would be a fairly workable solution potentially. And we could develop yet another protocol, but I don't think we want to do that either. So, next slide. So what do people think? Do we want to resurrect this? Do we want to wait a little bit further until secure DHCP v6 is further along? Do we want to try to do something else?
Ted Lemon. So I actually kind of liked your active lease query idea. The reason being that it eliminates the concern about timing, right? Because now you're having an actual communication between the relay agent and the server. And it's also something that relay agents that do snooping are likely to want to do anyway.
Right. For example, they'd like to do bulk query for lease query, for example, when they reboot because they can collect all the state, for example.
Yeah. Or, it could be that you even just do a lease query whenever you see a release go by or whenever you, well, no, you do have to do.
Well, the problem is, again, when we encrypt, right, you're not, all you're going to see is a packet went by. You're not going to know what's in it.
Yeah. So that said, I don't have any objection to doing the other solution. I just think that we should seriously think about, it's probably worth actually thinking about how plausible a solution it is to use active lease query. If we think that it's not really going to work, then we shouldn't do it. But we should at least answer that question before we develop a new thing, because we are now putting more junk into the DHCP packet, and if there's a better way to do it, maybe we should just do that. And I think active lease query, at least in principle, is a better way to do that.
Yeah, I think the only objection that might exist, and again, it's only a theoretical thing at this point, would be that active lease query, is a separate communication channel.
Yep.
And so the timing of it might be a little bit interesting because, if you let things go to the client, traffic might appear before the active lease query makes it through, especially if there's like a hiccup where the active lease query connection goes down because it's TCP based and it has to be restarted and things like that.
Yep.
So I think that would be the only concern that, might exist, because if you do want to, if like on a CMTS where you're installing a bunch of other state, when you get this stuff, they would really like to do it sort of as the packet goes back to the client. And so that's the only benefit, I think, for this option, is that it's will happen at the same time.
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe a better way to put it would be that active lease query is a good thing to do in addition to this, just because that will clean up any mistakes that happen.
That could be an argument. Yes. Yeah. So anybody else have any comments, pro or con, or?
Suresh Krishnan, I don't have any particular thing. I just don't want 3 and 5, so I'm okay with like 1, 2, and 4. And I would really like to wait until security IPv6 like gets out, and to see if like people have issues before we do it. Like, because we had similar things with send. Like there was like a lot of stuff done and it never got deployed. So like I don't know. Like I'm fine with like continuing working on this, but I'm just want to see like uptake before doing this, really.
Yeah, and I think it'll be. I agree that I think we've had a very long road with the secure DHCP v6 work, and so it may still be a little bit premature to start something because we don't know how it's going to end yet, right? But hopefully, hopefully one of these days we'll get a security mechanism that works, right? I mean, so yeah. But so I think that your recommendation is that we sort of park this for now and revisit periodically, depending on how secure DHCP v6
Say
goes.
a year from now, for example.
Okay. And I'm perfectly happy with that. I think, yeah, I was a little bit leery about bringing this up this early because I don't know how secure DHCP v6 is going to work out. There are some subtle benefits for this because it solves like the release problem and things like that. So there are some advantages in using this or the active lease query solution because the relay does get more up-to-date information.
Tim Chan, might be a bit of a naive question. What about things like 6939, where the relay's doing something based on what the client does? Is that an issue or is that irrelevant?
Which is that document?
That's the one where you can squeeze the MAC address of the client to get it into the relay to forward it for the people that have the warm, comfy slippers of wanting to see MAC addresses.
You mean the link?
Is that an issue or that type of thing?
No, because that's a link layer. Is that the link layer? That's a relay option. So
okay.
that
Right,
is
I
not
misunderstood.
encrypted. Yeah.
Okay.
That might be encrypted with IPsec, but the relays and stuff will know how to do that. So, all right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that brings us to the end of our formal agenda. So if there's any other things people want to discuss briefly, we can certainly take a few minutes to do so. But otherwise, we'll call the meeting adjourned.
This was probably the shortest DHC meeting ever.
We could talk about the M&O bits, right?
Tim Chan, so maybe I shouldn't mention this if you want to get away now. There is a discussion in 6-man about updating RFC 6434, which is the node requirements document. And there are some words in there about DHC and support for DHC. And there are some people in 6-man that have suggested that the DHCP support should be a may and not a should, that type of thing. I don't necessarily think there's a point having a discussion here now with 10 people, but if people here that are interested can take a look at the DHC relevant bits in 6434 and suggest some words, either that they think those are still fine or suggest words to replace those chunks in 6434, that would be useful.
Thank you. Yes, that is a good point. And, you know, we should follow that work and stay up with it, because just to see where it goes and comment on anything that's related to the DHC there. Thank you, Tim. All right, well, thank you. And we'll see you in Chicago.
Thanks.
Yeah, maybe.
For a 1 hour spot in Friday afternoon.
Well, I mean, one of these days we were probably going to end up with Friday afternoon. So, it's not too bad. But. And again, thanks, Ted, and I think it was Tim that did a lot of the Etherpad. Thank you.
Thank you for the quick response and the detailed review. So we will make some modification on our work to focus on the motivation.
Right. So you really need to explain, you know, what it is you're trying to